Welcome, everybody, to the Keltner Book Club meeting. Very honored to have our special guest, Mitchell Nathanson, who's got one heck of a book coming out. Since I saw it on Mary's list of books coming out this year, it's been on the top of my list to get. Under Jackie's Shadow, Voices of Black Minor League Baseball, Minor Leaguers Baseball Left Behind. Mary, you want to take over?
Absolutely. Yeah. So thanks for joining us, Mitch. I'm sure you have a lot of other things to do, but we appreciate your time because really looking forward to the book. I already have it on pre-order from our local bookstore here in Milwaukee, Boswell Books. So you can pre-order it if you want. It comes out Monday, I think. Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
so,
Monday.
Yeah. So let me just introduce you. You had mentioned before you received a BA from Tulane in 1988, a JD from Georgetown in 1991. Mitch is currently a professor of law at the Villanova University School of Law and a professor in the Jeffrey S. Moorhead Center for the Study of Sports Law at Villanova, which he helped to create. His scholarship focuses primarily on the intersection of sports, law, and society. I put in a newsletter. You can check more about Mitch on mitchellnathanson.com. It's a fantastic website. So just to start with, Mitch has several books that are very good. I think we had talked about the Boughton book. I've read this one. I don't know if a lot of people have read this one, A People's History of Baseball. And this came out in 2015. Mitch?
I think it came out 2012, I think.
Okay, yeah. And I found this to be fascinating. Just like, I think you had mentioned that it's like an alternative history of baseball or from a different viewpoint. There are counter stories, especially dispelling myths, about the standard stories we think of when we think of Branch Rickey, especially. But chapter 3 was like it seems like you've had this in your head for a while. And chapter 3, All Deliberate Speed, seems like a perfect premise to your new book. And I don't know, would you like to talk about that?
The All Deliberate Speed stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So that came to my mind when this was really more of a law thing than a baseball thing, which was everybody celebrates Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, and then everybody stops. And then there's the civil rights movement in the 50s and the 60s, and there's sort of a disconnect. Well, there's this decision, and then there's this civil rights movement that follows it. And at least for me, I was always of the mind of, well, it doesn't necessarily make sense if you had Brown versus Board, and then you just have this real struggle for civil rights. Well, the case sort of resolved everything, didn't it? Well, of course, the case it did, but there was this companion case that went with that, which came out in 55, which was, so there's Brown. It's called Brown 1 and Brown 2, and Brown 1 is the one everybody knows, which is the one that's separate but equal is unconstitutional. And then they remanded it back, and they were going to figure out for Brown 2, which came out the next year, which was, well, how are we going to desegregate schools? And that's where the All Deliberate Speed. I'm sure people are familiar with that language. So the court said that they were going to leave it to the states to determine how to desegregate, and with the mandate that they should do so with, quote, all deliberate speed. Well, that's what caused the civil rights movement, because what all the states did was just sit on it and not do anything. And that's why nothing happened. And that's really why Brown versus Board it's a monumental case. That's true. But it didn't do all that much because of the second part of that case. And the second part of that case, again, even in law school, you don't spend a lot of time on that case. You spend most of it on the first one. And the second one, people are aware of it. But I found the second part of that case fascinating because to me, that explained everything. Explained why we ended up with the situation that we ended up with and why the civil rights movement was such a struggle, because all these laws were on the books already. I mean, so it was nobody was enforcing them. And the reason nobody was enforcing them was because the Supreme Court said that the state didn't have to enforce them, which quite frankly is the same as what happened in Reconstruction, and why Reconstruction failed in the 1880s was that there was, I don't want to get into the whole Reconstruction, but there was a deal passed with regard to the presidential election where the Republicans got to get the president, but they agreed to not bother the Southern Democrats who weren't going to enforce the laws, and they were going to withdraw the federal troops, and that's how you ended up with Jim Crow. And it's sort of the same thing. It's a little, the specifics are different. But what that means in terms, then we're talking about baseball, so let's get back to baseball. So what does that mean in terms of baseball? It means in baseball, there was really no way to integrate baseball either, because really there were many laws in various cities and states that called for desegregation, but nobody was enforcing them. And so that's what led to all this. That's why baseball remained segregated, and why it took a person like Branch Rickey, who was really reading the tea leaves more than anything else, and decided he was going to get ahead of this, because there was a law in New York. There was a couple of laws. There's a city law and a state law in New York that were going to, allegedly require integration, even with regard to baseball. And I think the Dodgers, the Yankees, and the Giants were all given notice that they were going to have to do something. And the Giants and the Yankees sort of ignored it, and Branch Rickey didn't. And that's why he went out and signed Jackie Robinson. And so you can give him credit for that. And that's what this chapter really talks about, is that you can give him credit for that. But this was going to happen anyway because of other things, because of legal things that were going on. Anyway, that's it's a long way around, but it just goes to show you that there's the law, and then there's the reality, and sometimes those things don't really match up. And the Under Jackie's Shadow sort of picks up, like you said, it picks up from that and talks about, well, even though the game was integrated, it's been integrated since 46, 47, depending on how you count. There was a long period of time, and I guess you could still say it's not fully integrated. Everybody knows the low percentage of African Americans in Major League Baseball, and there's people talk about all the many reasons why that might be. But my book and the interviews I had with these players, who were these minor league players, who most of them never made it. A few of them had a cup of coffee, but talk about what it was like to play in the 60s and the 70s, where people weren't really thinking about these things. And yet all of the obstacles they had to go through just to play, and why so many of them just eventually gave up. And one of the things that I thought was interesting when I talked to these players, again, they played 50, 40, 50, 60 years ago. And they said that it's still something that if you're a Black kid growing up, that baseball isn't really your sport. You never were really welcomed into the game. And there's no law that's keeping you out. But it's not really a very welcoming sport. And this message is delivered in many different ways. And a few of the players that I spoke to talked about the different ways in which that happens, in which they see very clearly that it's easier for some than it is for others to advance. And again, there's no smoking gun for anything, but I think, when you hear enough of these stories, you start to realize, oh, this is why this is a problem. So anyway, yeah, those two are connected in that way, I guess.
Yeah, I thought it was a fascinating connection, and just, because integration was very, very slow, to put it, in a nutshell. And even though there were a lot of forces that were going to create integration, LaGuardia was big on it. But so what forces led to, do you think there were unofficial quotas or just reluctance to bring Black players up? So I guess, so we haven't been able to read your book. So I get the idea that these players were seeing white players who had less talent or weren't doing as well brought up to the big leagues ahead of them.
Well, so by the way, I don't have the book either. So, no, it'll be a surprise for all of us.
Okay.
But anyway, some of the things, so when I spoke to some of the players, one of the things that more than one player brought up was positional segregation, which was, or stacking, which was, if you were a black player, you were going to get pushed to certain positions. And so, yes, you were drafted and you were on the team, but they're going to push you to the outfield, or they're going to push you to first base, and they're going to push you off the middle of the infield. And I spoke to one guy, this guy, he was Hank Aaron's cousin, younger cousin, and he was a smaller guy, and he said, "Look, I was a middle infielder, but black guys just didn't play the middle of the infield, and so they kept pushing me off of second base and pushing me into the outfield." And so he made a really good point. He's like, "Look, as a middle infielder, I was a pretty good hitter for the 60s and the 70s. You know, you think of guys like Don Kessinger, Roger Metzger, you know, these guys didn't hit a lot, but they hit enough, you know, and they could really feel, you know, the positions change now, but back then," he said, so, you know, he was pretty honest about it. He said, "Look, I'm not going to delude myself thinking I was going to be a superstar. I wasn't going to be a superstar, but as a middle infielder, I had a chance. But once you push me out into the outfield, I didn't have the power to compete with a Dave Winfield, or a player like that. So they put me in the outfield, and my stats wouldn't match up, you know, with other players, and they would say that I'm not a prospect." And he's like, "Well, I'm not a prospect as an outfielder. I'm a prospect as a second baseman, if anything." But you know, he told his story was very interesting and compelling to me, because he told how he kept trying to get him. He was drafted as a middle infielder, but they kept pushing him off out of the middle of the diamond. They put him at third. They put him in the outfield, and he said that he knew that he was never going to go anywhere like that, and he would keep getting reports from farm director or whatever saying, "Yeah, you're not progressing." And he's like, "Well, of course I'm not progressing. I'm not a right fielder. I'm not a left fielder. I'm a middle infielder." And he would talk, you know, because he was Hank Aaron's cousin, he had access to big league managers and things like that. He talked about how he would go. He knew Frank Robinson a little bit, and Frank Robinson would tell him, like, you know, you got to get out of that organization that you're in right now, because you're not going to have a chance there. This was Cleveland, which Robinson had managed in Cleveland. I think he was in Baltimore at the time, but but even once he got out of there, you know, he said, "Well, you know, at that point now I'm 26, and I'm not going anywhere as a 26. You're not a prospect at 26 if you're in Double A. You're done." And a lot of players said that, like they got pushed out of their natural positions until it was too late. And then at that point, you're not a prospect with that. Another guy I interviewed talked about, he was a power hitter. So this is a different type of a player, but he mentioned how he spent 8 years in single A ball in the same town in the Midwest League. And he won the Triple Crown one year. He did not get promoted. Other people that he played with he would room with them. They would move on. He would stay behind. And meanwhile, I said he won a Triple Crown one year in his league, in the Midwest League. And every year he was near the top of the league in terms of average and home runs and things like that. And he went to the manager and the farm director, and I think the farm director was the one who said, "Well, we need you to stay there," because he was playing in Appleton, and he said, "Well, we need you to be there because, you know, we have some other black players coming through, and you know, it's good to have you here because it's easier for them." And he's like, "Well, I'm not here for that. I'm here to advance myself." And so after he aged out a little bit, again, he was there for 8 years, he never advanced. After a few years, he said, "Okay, fine. Well, then make me a coach. I'll be a coach." And they would say, "He'll be an unofficial coach." And he's like, "Well, don't make me an unofficial coach. Make me a coach and pay me as a coach." And they just never would. And so, you know, it's stories like that. And he, as I said, he made a really good point that I understand their reasoning, you know, of wanting me to be there to make it easier for other players. He said, "That's okay." He said, "But be honest with me. Tell me that's what you're doing, and then make me a coach, or else don't do that and let me advance and see if I can make it. And again, these guys are realistic. None of these guys, and this is important, I think, that these guys were not superstar talent. They're good enough to play professional ball, but they're not superstars. You know, if they were superstars, they would probably advance. But these guys are not Dick Allen. They're not Mookie Betts. They're probably very good professional ball players. Maybe they're AAA. Maybe they're bench players in the big leagues. Maybe they get a chance and they surprise somebody. But they all feel, at least, as though they had extra obstacles placed in front of them that other players didn't have. And if you don't have that otherworldly talent, eventually you're going to give up and you're going to walk away. That's what most of them did.
Yeah, it's a shame. I mean, they deserve better, you know, and it sounds like they're pretty gracious about it. Like, you know, this is their career and he's kind of accepting a coaching position. And yeah, so you had 13 players, and how did you choose the players?
Well, so it was tough to get the players to talk to me, because first of all, they didn't know who I was. And so the way this happened was the idea actually the idea really, it does come a little bit from the People's History, and it also comes a little bit from my Dick Allen book, but really the idea comes from one of the people in the book, Mickey Bowers, who I think is the first person I talked to, who played in the minors with the Phillies, who reached out, and because I mentioned him in the Dick Allen book, and I didn't interview him. In fact, I didn't even know that he was even still around, to be quite frank. I didn't even think about it. I in the Allen book, because I live in Philly, the Carpenter family's papers, Bob Carpenter's papers, are at the Hagley Museum in Delaware, and it's a 15-minute drive for me to go down there. I went down there, and if you go into the Carpenter papers, you can see scouting reports from when he owned the Phillies, and so I thought it'd be interesting to see all the scouting reports, to see what they thought of various players. I was really looking for Dick Allen related stuff. And of course, they took all the Dick Allen stuff out. They redacted all the Dick Allen stuff. But there were other players in there, and one of the players was this guy Mickey Bowers, who I thought, I pulled his card. There are all these little cards, and I pulled his card because I just thought his card was fascinating because it mentioned Allen, and it mentioned that something like he was a good hitter. I think he hit like 300. He only played like a year and a part of the season, and he hit like 300. But the scouting report at the end of the season said, I guess, you know, if you're manager of a team, you fill out the card, you send it in to the organization, and they keep a record of the players. And so his card said something like, "Yeah, you got to watch out for this guy. This is 1970. You have to watch out for this guy. You know, he's a Dick Allen type. He'll fight for his rights. We don't need another one like this." And they released him. And so I just kind of mentioned, because he had a good average. I can't remember what his average was, but I think it was like 302 or something. And I just mentioned that. And then later, I spoke to him. He contacted somebody else, and then they put him in touch with me. And I spoke to him, and he made a good point and said, "Yeah, you know, Dick Allen went through all he went through in Little Rock and in the minor leagues and everything, and that was, you know, it was what it was." He says, "But you got to remember, the Phillies invested a lot of money in Dick Allen. I think they had signed him to the highest. They gave him the largest signing bonus they had given anybody. I think maybe anybody had given anybody at that point. So they might treat him like garbage, but they have a vested interest in this guy advancing." He said, for me, they liked me enough to draft me. He's post 65, but I didn't have that talent. And so he says, there's more guys like me than there are like Allen. And if you think they treated Allen badly, you ought to talk to some of the guys who didn't have that talent and see what happened to those guys. So he very badly wanted to tell his story, and I quite frankly didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to tell it, and but I eventually I sat and I talked to him, and he had a really compelling story, and I thought it was just a great story, um, uh, really fascinating. And then at the end, I asked him, I said, "Are there other people who have stories to tell like you do?" He goes, "Oh yeah," and I said, "Oh," and in fact, he said, "I'll put you in touch with a couple of them if you want." And I said, "Sure." So he gave me a couple of names, and then I spoke to those players, and they gave me some names, and so I ended up with a bunch of players, and I also cold called some people and was able to speak to some players that way. It was always easier though if there was an introduction beforehand where somebody could say, "Hey, this guy's all right. I spoke to him. You can talk to him." And so I ended up with a bunch of players. Um, and at the end of that process, I was trying to figure out, well, how do I turn this? How do I tell the stories? I wanted it to be in their voice and not mine. So that's why they read like oral histories, because they are. But I didn't know there's different ways you can do an oral history. And I thought the best way to do it was I had 13, which had really good narratives that have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I had others that didn't. But I could have worked those in. But I thought, you know what, it's more compelling to just focus on the person. So I just picked those 13 because they had I thought they had really good stories that there's a through line through them. And I hopefully when you read them, you'll see that there is a through line. And those kind of work as set pieces. And so that's why I ended up with 13 stories. I tried to get as much of a variety in terms of organizations. I could have made this a story about the Phillies, quite honestly. I had more than enough still people who had stories about the Phillies, but I also learned that it wasn't specific to the Phillies. I mean, there was every organization had this sort of issue. I have Dodgers, I have Detroit Tigers, and Oriole people in the Orioles organization, the Phillies, the Reds, the Seattle Pilots, the Twins, everybody, Yankees. So I tried to do that. I tried to see if I could get a wide as wide as possible in regard to geography in terms of where they're coming from. And I only have what I have, so it's by no way a scientific study or anything. But I think with what I had, I hope I was able to get enough of a cross section of clubs and upbringings and stories so that you get a flavor.
Sounds good. Yeah, yeah. No, there must be a lot of them because, even with the star players, it seems like I know with the Cubs, there was always a rumor that Phil Wrigley didn't want too many blacks on the Cubs. So that led to the Lou Brock trade, which was, of course, one of the worst trades ever. Yeah, and these are guys who weren't stars, but certainly deserved to play.
Yeah, there was one. Oh,
sorry.
sorry. No, there was just on top of that. There was one guy who played for the Pilots who told me that he, at the end of spring, he got invited to big league spring training in '69, and towards the end of spring training, a coach, not Joe Schultz, but a coach, called all the black players into a room, and he told them that you guys are competing for one or two spots. He's like, you're not competing against the white players, you're competing against each other. And we're going to take the best, I don't know how many, one or two north. And he's like, what is this? We're not even competing for a spot on the club to see who's the best 25. They're just going to take, they've already decided they're taking, I don't know what the number is, but they're taking a couple and then that's it. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I just have a few questions. If anybody has a question, you can raise your hand or put it in the chat.
Thanks, Mary. Mitch, I grew up in the Philly area, so I remember Dick Allen, Richie, and so a couple of questions. Maybe the first one is, were there any discrimination cases that came out of any of these stories, or have there been discrimination cases where players have filed lawsuits against clubs because they were discriminated against?
I'm not aware of any. If you want to be a ball player, you're not going to sue the club, right? Once you even once you start down that road, you're done. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the players told stories about a certain coach um, or whoever, a person, a farm director. A lot of these are farm directors. Interesting thing about these coaches and farm directors, which I never thought about before, was that even though we're talking the 60s and early 70s here, a lot of those coaches and farm directors predated the integration of baseball. So you're looking at really old school guys who probably weren't so thrilled that Jackie Robinson broke the call. And so he said, that's what you're dealing with. And then you put that guy in Daytona Beach, Florida in 1965 and see what happens. You're not going to really get a person who's going to be willing to listen to you. So there's a lot of that. But one thing that more than one player told me was that, forget a lawsuit. He said that you wouldn't even, unless something really egregious happened, and even if something did, he said most of the time you wouldn't say anything to even your teammates because you didn't want to get a reputation as a guy who was a complainer. These guys, they just, despite everything, they wanted to advance, and they understood that the way to advance is to keep your mouth shut. And if you start spouting off about this guy or that guy, even though you might be right, you're done. And everybody had enough experience with that sort of thing in other contexts to know that, if your goal is to be in the major leagues or to advance, you're just not going to say anything. So forget a lawsuit. You're probably not even going to say anything.
Yeah, good question. So, you have the situation. So few blacks are being promoted at that time. Do you think that affected later generations of blacks? And I know there are a lot of different reasons why there's such a low percentage of blacks playing in Major League Baseball. It's easier to play basketball as a kid, but do you think this had an effect? Just this statement?
A few players said that it did, and that they said that a few of them said that, if you don't think that a young black kid today who wants to play baseball isn't aware of the history of all this stuff, you're crazy. He said other people might not be aware of it, but these kids are aware. And he said there's, I'm trying to think of an individual player, but I think more than one of them said things to the effect that there would not be a lot of encouragement for a young black kid to pursue baseball. If they could do something else, the encouragement would be elsewhere. And there's a lot of reasons for that. First is the history of it, but also the fact that in terms of scholarship money, there's more scholarship money in basketball and football. And baseball, even the top programs, they're given a pool of money, and most players get like a partial scholarship. Even in the top programs, they're not really getting the amount of money that can really give you a scholarship. They could give them financial aid, though, right? They could get financial aid, and that's another thing some people brought up. Like, yeah, some of these kids, they're coming from poorer backgrounds, they could qualify, but there doesn't seem to be much of an impetus for colleges to do that. And so where's the impetus? The impetus is coming in basketball and football. Those are bigger money sports. Baseball, not only you're not going to get a lot of money unless you're a superstar, right? That's a different situation. But if you can do a few things, you're probably not going to pick baseball. I mean, there's really no reason why you would pick baseball. There's so many reasons why you wouldn't. Unless there's a strong, unless you're really, you're going to be a first round draft choice. Okay, that's a different story. There's money there. But other than that, there's really not a lot of incentive for a young black kid to play baseball.
Yeah. But they say, a lot of people just say, oh, blacks aren't playing baseball. But I know that there's tons of, like in Chicago, there's a great organization where they have clinics, and there are plenty of blacks playing baseball, but I don't know. But was there a testimony that kind of hit you the most or struck you the most?
Well, there was one guy mentioned how he he went through all this stuff and he left baseball. And the interesting thing about a lot of these guys is they have some really horrific stories, and yet they eventually come back to almost all of them come back to baseball years later. It's very interesting that you would think that after all those things, you wouldn't want to have anything to do with it. And a lot of these guys did spend some time where they said that they couldn't even watch a baseball game. But then as the years passed, they kind of came back. And one guy did come back and had some connections with Major League Baseball and ended up working in the Astros organization up until about 15 years ago. And his job was to recruit Black kids in California for the Astros, because I think he mentioned in the 2005 they went to the World Series in 2005, right? They played the White Sox. Is that who they played?
Right.
And they didn't have a single Black player on their team. And so the local NAACP, I think, picketed outside of the stadium during the World Series. And so that was embarrassing. And so they, as part of their effort to remedy that, this guy got hired. And he recruited a bunch of players, and you get to fill out reports, and you get to deal with your regional scouting director. That's all a chain of the hierarchy of command. And he would take these reports to his regional scouting director, and nothing would happen. And then finally he asked, why are none of these guys getting signed? And this guy said to him, I'm never signing a Black kid. I'm just not. This is 2010. He said, I'm not doing it. And so this guy quit. Eventually that guy got fired. So he's no longer there, no longer in baseball. And again, this isn't the general manager of the Astros. This is a regional scouting director. But this is 2010, right? So this is not 1953. And so I found that pretty compelling, because I was really stunned to hear that that was still happening. And again, it's not like it's damning the Astros organization. The general manager and the hires probably never knew this. They probably weren't even aware of this. But just shows the power that these lower level people, who are sort of like the gateway to the higher level, they can just cut off the supply of players on their own, and nobody will know why. And this was an example of it. And so I thought that was pretty compelling.
Yeah, that's a good point. Interesting. Yeah, Dennis.
You mentioned keep your mouth shut. Isn't that part of the problem Richie Allen had? He was willing to say things, and he was a star, got away with it, but they didn't like anybody. They don't like players probably in general mouthing off, but a Black player probably was not liked at all.
Yeah. I mean, Allen, it's funny because Allen was really an introvert, and he really, left to his own devices, wouldn't say anything. But he was also a guy that if you asked him a question, he'd tell you what he thought. The interesting thing about Allen was that he would think something at 7 o'clock, and then you ask him the same question at 8 o'clock, and he would think something completely different. And so he would drive sports writers crazy, because they would then two sports writers would interview him after the game, and they would file their stories, and they have two completely different stories. And they would feel like Allen was selling them out and trying to make him look bad. But actually, that's just who he was. He's just, you ask him a question, and however he feels at that moment, that's the answer. That would drive people crazy. But going back to your main point, that's true that he would drive people nuts. But again, he was Dick Allen. And as long as he was producing, it would frustrate people, but he was still getting a big league paycheck. But if he didn't have that talent, he would have been gone pretty fast.
Yeah. And then you mentioned the player who spent 8 years in the same team in Class A. Did they just keep some of these guys there? So if someone came to him and said, "Well, what are you doing about promoting Black players or recruiting Black players?" If they have 10 or 12 or 15 in the minor leagues, see, we're really working on it, but they really didn't have the gumption to want to go further with it. Was that some of it, maybe?
Well, so this was in Appleton, and this guy said that he grew up he grew up in an integrated neighborhood, and then I think he grew up in North Carolina, and then he went to Appleton, which he said was the whitest part of the world he'd ever seen. And he said he loved Appleton. He thought it was great. Not very diverse, but he loved playing there, and he loved the fans there, and he loved everything. He said, but he did think that they were stationing him there just to have a black player there, and there were probably players everywhere like that. Again, he didn't have Dick Allen talent. If he had Dick Allen talent, he would have gone on, but he certainly had enough talent to get beyond A ball, Class A ball in the Midwest League. And he just also he tried at one point. He actually tried to get traded, and the Dodgers tried to trade for him, and the farm director wouldn't release him, or just release him. He wanted them just to release him so he could sign on with the Dodgers, and the farm director wouldn't release him. And he said he was stuck. The only thing I could do was either continue to play in the Midwest League, or I had to quit. That was the only thing I could do. I couldn't leave.
I know that at one time, I think in probably the 50s, the feeling was if we're going to have a substitute on our bench in the major leagues, you'd rather have a white guy than a black guy. Was that part of it as well?
Yeah, so a lot of those guys talk about that as well, about how, you were only going to advance if you were a player who was going to be an everyday player.
Yeah.
Nobody was going to promote a guy who was a utility guy. Those were the positions that were reserved mostly for white guys. If you were a white guy, you could field and not hit so well, you could move on. But if you were a black guy, that wasn't going to happen, or it was very rare that it. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, just pedaling backwards, in your People's History of Baseball, you talked about Branch Rickey and his way of handling integration, and that it affected things for years to come. So you wrote this way back then. Is that still true?
You mean, do I still believe that?
Yeah.
Or what? Like,
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, I still believe that. I know Lee Lowenfish and I have a disagreement on that. Which is fine. But I don't know. I guess I think you can give him some credit for being the person who did it. But as I said to him one time, like, what do you think if there was no Branch Rickey, there would be no blacks in baseball? I mean, of course there were going to be. There was going to be in 1946. That was going to happen in 1946 or 47. There was 100% chance that was going to happen, whether there was a Branch Rickey or no Branch Rickey. And
Bill Veeck was going to do it. Yeah.
Bill Veeck was going to do it, right? And whether you believe what he says about the Phillies or before that or not, it doesn't matter, because there's enough evidence when he owned the Cleveland Indians that he signed a number of black players, and he paid the clubs for the players, which Branch Rickey did not do. Mm-hmm. So this was going to happen, and I think the point I made in that chapter was that it may have been better if there was no Branch Rickey, because if it had happened as a matter of law as opposed to the seeming benevolence of the white savior, then it would be more that you have a right to play rather than you have been given this, bestowed this gift of playing, and then it would make things different. You couldn't get away. Once the Dodgers integrated, there was no pressure on anybody else. Other teams could integrate or not. The Indians did, and look what happened to them. They went to the World Series and they were very successful. The Yankees didn't. Other teams did begrudgingly. The Phillies didn't. The Red Sox didn't. But that wouldn't have been the case, I don't think, had integration happened differently. I think if it had happened differently, you wouldn't have been able to get away with what the Red Sox and the Phillies got away with for as long as they did. But I think that, Branch Rickey really took the bullet for everybody else, none of them who wanted to integrate. And I think that once he did, it was like, oh, okay. Again, all deliberate speed. We can integrate on our own schedule. And at the beginning of the Allen bio, I have a chapter on Bob Carpenter and how the Phillies integrated in the 50s, and just how obstinate Bob Carpenter was, and how he was saying everything I said in People's History about the all deliberate speed stuff. He was like, "Oh yeah, we're going to integrate on our own time," and they had signed a couple of minor leaguers who really were not prospects, and he would get self-righteous about how I'm just not going to sign a black player, just sign a black player. I think that's racist. I'm going to wait. It's like, meanwhile, other teams are signing Willie Mays and Aaron. Like there's no other black players out there. I mean, the Phillies are like descending into obscurity, as the 50s go on, and yet Bob Carpenter can't find any black players. Meanwhile, there's Rick Campanella was from Philly. So that I think would never have been permitted if integration had happened differently. There would be no way that Bob Carpenter would have gotten away with that. But because this is how it integrated, I'm picking on Bob Carpenter. But there were a lot of owners who were like that.
There were a lot of racist forces. Yeah. I mean, it's because, Ricky was a cold-hearted capitalist and wanted to make money, and it was successful to integrate. And still these other teams were slow to integrate. I mean, even though they knew they'd be more successful, or I don't know.
I think they were making money anyway. They were still making money, right?
Exactly. They were content with that.
Right.
Right. And you get into that in other ways. Yeah.
Mitchell.
Does anybody else have a question?
Yeah, Mitchell, Steve King. I have a question. I was just curious if you came across much about how white minor leaguers, responded to the signing of Jackie Robinson. The reason why I asked this question is back in the 90s, that at the Philadelphia branch of SABR, we had Barney Schultz, who was famous for being the relief pitcher on the 16 Cardinals. And he went into detail about his high school teammates and all. And I asked him innocently, I said, "What do you remember? You were in the minor leagues when Jackie Robinson was signed." I was curious, how did the minor leaguers respond? And he said, "I don't remember anything about that." And I was just curious if you have any comments about that. It was like he was like I was accusing him of being a member of the Ku Klux Klan. It was just unbelievable that this major thing, he could say, "I don't remember anything about it." I was just curious what your response is, or if you know anything about it.
Not really. I mean, the players that I dealt with played many years after that. So the players that I spoke to played in the 60s, 70s. So they were later than that. In terms of their dealing with their white teammates, there were very few issues. I just think everybody wants to move on. Everybody just wants to play as well as they can play, and they're all singularly focused on what they need to do to move on. And I didn't get the impression that there was much camaraderie. There was much of anything. It was just a bunch of players. One guy, I think it was, who I spoke to? I spoke to Ron Allen, Dick Allen's brother, and he just because I was interested, because I had done the Dick Allen thing. I was interested in what it was like to be his brother. And to play, and he played in the Phillies system and the Cardinals system, and he got a few at bats. I think he has a home run in the major leagues, one. And he said he was interesting. He's much more gregarious than Dick was. He's a very nice guy, but he said that one thing that he learned, he said, maybe I learned this from my brother, but I saw this also, is that once he said, baseball is fun until you sign that contract. And then once you sign that contract, it stops being fun. And he says, yes, when I was a kid, I loved to play baseball. It was a lot of fun. I couldn't wait to play. But then once I signed that contract, I realized that this isn't a game anymore. This is a business. And those other 24 guys on the team, I'm competing against them. And he says that became very clear the moment you walked into a clubhouse, that these guys were only technically your teammates. You were actually competing against them, because only a few guys were going to get moved up at the end of the year. Some will get released, some will get moved up, and some are going to stay in A-ball forever. So he said that it just you become singularly focused. And so this might explain why, if you were a white guy playing around that time, you might not have noticed anything, because you were probably 18, 19 years old, and all you're thinking about is, I got to move on, and you probably have tunnel vision, I would think. That's my explanation. And that's what Ron Allen told me, but you know, I can only speak as to that.
Thank you.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other
Dave?
questions?
Dave has his hand up.
Yeah, I've got a few things here that are just short answer questions. When does your book come out?
Next week.
And do some people get an advanced copy? And when do they get that?
Well, if they do, I'm not one of them. I don't have a copy of it. Yeah, there were people who got advanced copies. I know because some people have done reviews and things. But I think if you have a NetGalley account, you can see it. You can read it there. I don't know how one gets a NetGalley account, but it is on NetGalley. I don't know how people get access on NetGalley, but apparently there's a password or something. I don't know how that works, but it's there. If you want to, if you have access to that, that's where you can read it right this very moment.
Have you had anybody call and ask questions about your book?
Well, you guys called.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I have a few people in terms of lining up things like this. You mean questions in terms of what?
Yeah, well, you know, I was just wondering if somebody would maybe call up and try to deny something that you wrote, even though you're trying to write a historical book. This is the type of book, although I haven't read it, of course, but I don't know if someone would call up with some contentious things based on what you've written.
Like deny what?
Well, you know, they might deny some of the things that you and I might interpret as being racist in the book.
Well, I mean, I don't know how you can deny somebody's opinion. Somebody's opinion is this is their story, right?
I suppose.
It's like a memoir, and this, you know, why not bring in all my books? I'll talk about Boughton for a second. The thing about Boughton or Ball 4, right? We'll talk about Ball 4. Ball 4 is people made the mistake of assuming that Ball 4 was journalism. It's not journalism, it's a memoir. And it's because it's a memoir, this is just his opinion. And is he right? Did you know? I don't know. It's his opinion. It's what he feels. It's you know, people got mad that he didn't interview Bowie Kuhn for Ball 4. And his response was, why should I interview Bowie Kuhn? This is my take on what it was like to play in Major League Baseball in 1969. I don't need Bowie Kuhn's opinion. And so I would say the same thing is true here, that this is their take. This is their opinion, their lived experience. Other people will have different experiences. Other people will say, this didn't happen to me, to which I would say, good for you. Didn't happen to you, but this person says it happened to them. And doesn't just because it didn't happen to somebody else doesn't mean it didn't happen to this person.
Yeah.
So I think that's the, you know, I do think that people make the mistake of assuming everything is journalism. And not everything is journalism. Some things are just again, memoir, or they're a recounting of their emotional experience or whatever it is. And again, people have different experiences, but I don't see, I guess somebody can, I don't know, people are gonna complain about everything, but you know, let them complain.
So your storytelling.
I just want to end with this comment, and that is, it seems to me that the black players back in the 60s and 70s probably had a tough needle to thread. That is, like Dick Allen, if he's too aggressive, then that's interpreted as being threatening. If they're too laid back, you know, then they might be considered lazy. So I think that's for the blacks to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, some players did talk about that, about, you know, comportment and how things were interpreted. And I know that, like, so I going back to Mickey Bowers, he said that he got a lot of crap from management that he was self-centered, that he only cares about his batting average. because he would write his batting average and his statistics. He said, I would keep my statistics in my locker. I would write them down, post them every day, and I'd update them so I knew what I was doing. And somebody came around, I don't know, coach or whoever, and it got back to management that, oh, Bowers only cares about his statistics. He's not a team player. That shows up on his card, by the way. And his response, I asked him about it because I had his card, and I asked him about that, and he said, well, how am I going to advance? Are they going to promote me because I'm a team player and I clapped for the other guy when he scored a run, or are they going to promote me because I'm hitting 330? That's how you get promoted. You get promoted if your numbers are good, because that's what they look at. And he says, so if I want to get promoted, I want to make sure that my numbers are where they need to be. And if that motivates me to do as well as I can do, that benefits everybody. He said, but he would hear about it. He would hear that he was self-centered because he wrote his batting average down. And he's like, everybody should write their batting average down. If we all hit 330, we would all do well, and the team would win. He said, but the point is, that's what they look at. But what goes to your point, what you were saying, that you would get, people would make assumptions based on weird things like that. And he said once that got written down, there was no way to undo it. That's just who you were in their eyes. And at that point, he said, you're done. Unless you're otherworldly, you're done. You're finished. And his story ends after 1 year. I mean, he plays the 1 year. They, I think they didn't even release him. He wanted to get released and picked up. And again, another team wouldn't release him. He had to sue them. Actually, there was a lawsuit. It wasn't a discrimination lawsuit, but it was a breach of contract lawsuit. He did sue them. He did sue the Phillies to get out of his contract because he said they didn't assign me anywhere and they wouldn't release me. So I'm not getting paid and I can't play anywhere. And they held on to him for 6 months in 71. And he said they finally granted him his release in the middle of the season. He said at that point it was too late to hook on with anybody else. The earliest he could hook on with somebody in 72. At that point, he was out of baseball for 2 years. And then that was done.
Thank you.
Mitch, just as you're talking about it, makes me appreciate Curt Flood even more. I need to go back and read more about Curt Flood. But I was curious about, you mentioned that when you went to the Carpenter papers, that what I thought you said was they redacted everything about Dick Allen.
Yeah.
Was there legal reasons for that, or were there just his reputation, or?
I have no idea why there was not a single mention of Dick Allen.
That's curious.
In thousands of pages. There's everybody. You want to know what Mike Schmidt's social security number is? You can find it. If you go down to the Hagley, you can get his social security number. It's right there on his card. All these guys have all their information. There is nothing about is as if Dick Allen never existed. I think the only mention I ever found was on Mickey Bauer's card. And that wasn't even about Dick Allen. It was about Mickey Bauer's. And quite frankly, I think they overlooked it. I think if they had seen that there was a mention of Dick Allen and Mickey Bauer's card, that card wouldn't be there either.
Interesting.
I mean, that's my guess, but there's nothing else about Dick Allen in there.
That's curious.
It's weird. Yeah.
Any other questions? I don't want to keep you too long, Mitch. So, do you want to say? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm interested in compensation. Was it clear to you what it was like for those players in terms of payment, in terms of other type of compensation, given the levels that they were at and the type of, sort of meta competition they had over these very limited number of spots?
Well, again, if you were a star, you got paid. But a lot of these guys said, well, if you weren't at that level, they said, well, the bonus money went to the white guys. If you were a white guy, you could get a bonus. Not that everybody did, but those were the people who were going to get it. He said very few black players who were not superstars would get anything other than just here's the contract. I do know that one guy mentioned in terms of compensation that he grew up, he was a middle-class kid and he very badly wanted to go to college. And he was told he signed when he was 18 and because he was going to go to college. And he had I think he had a partial scholarship somewhere. And he was told that if he signed with the club, Again, this is pre-65, I believe, so it was no draft. And so he was told that if he signed with a certain club, they would pay for him to go to college in the off season. And then after the season, they assigned him to winter ball in Florida. And he said, well, okay. And they told him that was good because only their better prospects got sent to winter ball. And they said, okay, that's great. What about college? And he said, well, if you go to winter ball, you can't go to college. He's like, well, can I do both or can I do college later? I go, no, you have to pick one or the other. And so he said, well, I picked winter ball because, I wanted to play baseball. So he picked winter ball. He didn't go to college. And then the next year, he's not rooming, but he's on a team with the white guy who he knew at winter ball. He saw him at winter ball. And then he also found out this guy, they paid for his college, even though they sent him to winter ball. So he's like, okay, I don't know the specifics of his situation. All I know is that they offered me college and then they made me choose and they took college away. Whereas this other guy, he went to winter ball with me and yet they're still paying for his college. So that was his experience.
It's really interesting stuff. And I think it really affects still what's going on in baseball today. I mean, what's your opinion of MLB as an institution now? Or is that take too much time?
I mean, a lot of players mentioned the RBI program. I know one guy I spoke to was, what was the name of the guy who started? John something or other. I can't remember. He played for the Tigers, I think. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. This guy, though, helped this guy start the program. I can't remember the name of the guy. But all you do is Google it and you'll see the name of the guy who started RBI. But anyway, this guy worked with him and he started it. And he said, yeah, they're taking steps. The Dodgers have done a lot to revamp baseball fields in inner city LA. And I think Clayton Kershaw has given a lot of money. Kevin Brown, Clayton, I know Clayton Kershaw has. So the Dodgers have been pretty good. But a lot of these guys, like, well, the history is they have so much to recover from. And so much, the reputation is so bad that, restoring a field in South Central is nice, but these kids are going to hear from their parents about how you just don't want to play baseball. And so, yes, it's a nice field, and there's no denying that at least the Dodgers have actually put a lot of money into this. And they're not the only team. Other teams have done that also. And baseball, Major League Baseball has done a fair amount, but there's a century and a half of stuff that went before it, and it's going to take a lot. And I when I talk to these guys still like baseball. That's the amazing thing. They still like baseball despite everything, but they also say, I think I ended a couple of chapters saying, if I had a kid who was, asking me for advice, I would say, just don't do it. It's not worth it. There's too much heartache. There's too much that can go wrong. If you can do anything else, do that other thing. So that's a lot to overcome, even though I do think that baseball is a lot more proactive now than it's probably ever been. So, it's better, I guess. But then again, like I said, that one guy mentioned in 2010, there's this local farm guy, and for the Astros organization, and there's probably guys like that everywhere who are, unbeknownst perhaps to the organizations themselves, that they're cutting off all of this potential talent that might be out there, and turning people away who otherwise would be more amenable towards giving baseball a shot. That's speculation. I don't know if that's true.
Thank you.
Mitch, just a book recommendation. Do you have any recommendations on books related to your professional work, baseball and the law? one quick comment, and when you may know this, but Matthew and Henry Killelea, who owned the Milwaukee Brewers when they became part of the American League in 1900, they were both lawyers. Matthew died far too young, and Henry became the legal counsel to Byron Van Johnson. And an interesting character. I called the Hall of Fame about him years ago, and they had nothing on him. He's an important figure in the founding of the American League. But any books on the legal baseball and the law?
I don't know. Baseball. I don't know. I mean, the course that I teach, I don't really get into any of the specifics. The course that I teach is really more of like I kind of let the students write about whatever they want to write about, and what I teach is really more about how to write a paper. So I don't have a textbook that's a baseball and the law textbook. It's more of a how to write a scholarly paper textbook, and so I don't have anything. I'm just trying to think. There is a couple of baseball and the law books. I think I may have contributed to one of them, but I have to say it isn't good. So I don't recommend it. You know, the problem with those books, I think, well, first of all, baseball and the law is that'd be a tough kind of a textbook to write because it's very specific. Most of them in law school is mostly sports law. So it was just baseball, nobody would want it. And also there are a couple of books. If you Google baseball law, I think there is actually a baseball law one.
I've got a few.
But yeah, but I think the problem with those books is that they have many different authors and people contribute a chapter, and they're really scattershot all over the place. And there's no coherence to those books, at least in my opinion. And so you don't really you just get a little thing over here and a little thing over here. And there's really no coherence to those books. But it'd be hard. It's hard to write a baseball and law book because I don't think there are too many baseball and the law classes. There's baseball and American culture classes, and there's sports law classes, but baseball and the law, you could do it. I don't know what the market would be. I don't know what the market is for my book, so let alone baseball and the law.
Tim, Dennis Paget of our chapter has written that era of baseball in Milwaukee.
Yeah,
and he'd be a good one to ask questions. He would, he's done a lot of work and probably would have that.
Yeah, I know Dennis, and I've had breakfast. I've met with Dennis a couple times. Yeah. But those famous cases like the Curt Flood case and the Black Sox scandal, some of the cases around Shoeless Joe Jackson were actually litigated here in Milwaukee.
Well, there are good books about those specific things.
Yeah,
there's a lot of good books about those. There was one that came out a few years ago. It was great. About the Black Sox and it was about all those lawsuits. I think it was about all those Black Sox lawsuits. It was a really good book. I really liked it. So it's really specific that time period, but I thought that was really good. And there are some books like that if you just want to focus on like those cases. What is the name of that book? I think the University of Illinois put that one out.
Bill Lamb wrote a book about the Joe Jackson trial, if I remember correctly.
Was that it? Yeah.
Bill Lamb. I forget the name of the book, but Bill Lamb.
Yeah, there are some really good books about that.
And Dennis, thank you Dennis wrote a couple of profiles for SABR on the Killelees.
Yeah, I thought.
Yeah.
It's worth also noting that both Van Johnson and his contemporary as president of the National League, Harry Pulliam, both attended law school before they entered journalism. So they both had very, very similar backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
They had my sympathy.
It's been great. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've written a lot about the antitrust exemption. I know that. Is there any way people can access your papers?
Oh yeah, they're
your
all
website.
Those you can get for free. So if you can, so if you go to, I believe you can access that stuff through my website. You can also access it. So I have two websites. I have mitchellnathanson.com, and I think you can access it through there. There's another website which is more like my law school website, and it's like a BPress, BEPRESS.
Yeah,
It's
you sent me something in an email. Yeah.
right, and underneath my signature line in my emails, there's a link, and you just click that link, and it takes you to my page. That the Villanova Law School, my Villanova Law School scholarship page. I guess that's what it is. And if you go there, all that stuff is there. You just have to. That's all free. You just click it and download it, and it's all there. So there's all sorts of stuff about. There's a few things about antitrust. There's some things about. I thought I wrote one about there's a California 7-year law, which is actually the Olivia de Havilland law, which I thought was interesting because it actually brings into question whether those long contracts signed by Trout and Pujols are actually legal. I think they're not.
Wow.
But because they violate the de Havilland law, which is just unique to California. So my point of the article was that I think that the Angels could have gotten out of that contract after 7 years if they had wanted to. It would have caused a major a major uproar had they done it, but also by the same token, Trout could get out of his contract after 7 years if he wanted to. He doesn't have to stick with it. He's got I don't know how many years he is into that contract. Not that many, I think. But actually, how many years has he been in the big leagues?
I'm sorry, what's that?
How many years has Trout been with the Angels? I think more than.
Oh God, I don't
He's
even know.
over 10, he's 11, 12.
Yeah, so yeah, the interesting thing, and now we're off on a tangent, but the interesting thing about that is that I believe that his time in the minor leagues and different contracts, as long as he's with the Angels organization, they all count as one. So even though he signed separate contracts, I think it counts as one. And I think that he has to have the ability to leave, to opt out. And which is a quirk of that law. And it's not related to baseball, it's related to Hollywood. That's why all these actors back in the contract era in Hollywood, they all had 7-year contracts because they were not allowed to have more than a 7-year contract. But it hasn't really been applied in sports. It would never be applied in football because who plays for more than 7 years? Most players don't. But it does apply in baseball. And the Dodgers and the Angels and the Padres and the Giants, I think, are all subject to it. Arguably, they are. And their antitrust exemption doesn't get them out of it. So, because that has been actually litigated in different contexts. I think, I'm getting too far into it, but there's other instances where people have tried to make that argument outside of the sports area, and the courts have pretty clearly ruled that doesn't get you out of it. You're stuck with it.
Have you approached anyone with this?
I just wrote it. I just thought it was fun to write, but I do think there's a case there. I think there's a pretty good case there that you could get out of that.
Interesting.
Again,
Can the Dodgers get out of their contract with Ohtani the way this gambling thing is going?
well, 7 years though. You have to be 7 years. I don't think
Okay.
they got 7. They just signed Ohtani, right? So we're with the clock reset. So they got 7 years with Ohtani. And there's not much they can do with it. But the interesting thing is that the minor league stuff counts, which is really, to me, fascinating that all those years in the minors count towards the 7 years. And so anyway, there's stuff like that. There's some antitrust stuff. The interesting thing about the antitrust stuff, I thought, was that the Oakland A's, I think there's a city of San Jose. That was the city of San Jose, and the Oakland A's. Was a lawsuit there a few years ago where I think they were going to challenge the antitrust exemption. I did some work on that, and they all ignored me. But I said to them, it was for the city of San Jose. That's where the city of San Jose was trying to get the antitrust exemption overturned. So I don't know. I got brought in to be ignored, I guess. But my suggestion was to argue that there was no such thing as an antitrust exemption, and that because I don't think there is. And if you made that argument, it might sound like a weird argument, but there are enough people in the Supreme Court right now who would buy that argument. I think that there are people who want to roll back the Commerce Clause to pre New Deal, like Thomas and Kavanaugh and Alito, and I think there's enough people who really want to roll back the Commerce Clause to what it was prior to the New Deal, and they would say a case like baseball is an easy way to do it because there's really there's no cost to it.
Yeah.
But I think you have a decent chance of winning that case if you did it. I think you'd find fine justices. Not that I agree with that, but I don't agree with anything Clarence Thomas says. But I do think that's who I would be talking to if I was the city of San Jose and I wanted to have the A's come.
Yeah. For the question about sites, we'll make sure our newsletter has these websites, Mary, that you got so we'll have that in the newsletter. If you don't get our newsletter, send me a message, chat or something, or let me know after we end the recording, and I'll add you to that so you get the newsletter. So
Great.
So anything else, Mitch? Anything you want to mention, or any scores to settle, or before you?
These scores to settle. I think I settled them up. Let's see. Oh,
We do everything here.
The only thing would be that is that the drawing. So there are visuals in this book. There are drawings, and the drawings are done by my daughter. And so I'm a proud dad, so I think those are pretty cool. And I'm really glad that I was able to do that. They came about because we tried to get photos, and it's very tough to get high-res photos of these people. First of all, there's nowhere you can get them from in terms of like the organization they played for. These minor league teams, they move around so much and the ownership changes. It's not like you can call the Tigers and ask for, this guy's a career minor leaguer who never played for the Tigers, but he played in the organization. They don't have, and if you call the club that he played for, that team has changed ownership 40 times since he played. So there are no pictures. And you ask the players for these guys for the pictures. It's tough. It's a lot of times they don't own the rights to those pictures. They may own the photo, but they don't own the rights to the picture. So it became a real problem to figure out what to do about the pictures. And then I realized, well, these aren't major leaguers that people would recognize anyway. And so why not try to get another sort of visual representation? And so my daughter, who's an artist, I gave her each chapter, and we kind of talked about, like, try to pick a scene that would be representative of each player's story, and draw that. And that's what she did. And so I think that's pretty interesting. And I think it's a pretty cool little part of the book that you don't normally see. You don't normally see, ink drawings, in a book. And I think they add to the story.
Really cool. Yeah.
Okay. And Mitch, before you leave, we're going to give a copy of your book away to somebody on this Zoom meeting here. If you
Maybe I'll get one.
Yeah. I don't think our budget has the money in it. If you can, I wish it did. If you can pick a number between 1 and 9.
1 and 9.
Yeah.
I'll pick 9. Because that's
Jack?
many trios now.
Ted Williams.
Jack, congratulations, Jack.
All right, thank you.
The Chicago Jack?
Yeah.
All right. Do you
I
have my
picked 9
email,
because
Jack?
of Manny Trio.
Oh, okay.
Oh, really? Most people say Ted Williams, but I like
Manny Trio was my favorite player when I was growing up.
I kind of like the Manny Trio now. That's a good one. So Jack,
That's a
the
good one.
book's out next week. I'll get it either pre-ordered before it comes out or right after it comes out. So we'll get that sent your way. Manly,
Thank you,
sir,
appreciate it. Great talk to you.
Yeah, sorry you didn't win this time, Manly. Manly won the last book. So did the book arrive yet? You're on mute, I think. Yeah.
Have not seen it yet.
Okay, it's on its way. I think it said 2 to 9 days. So I've never seen delivery go 2 to 9 days before. So yeah. Okay. Good.
Congratulations, Jack.
I'm gonna have to look for your Dick Allen book before I'll take you back memory lane. But thanks for writing it.
Oh,
Thanks.
well, I hope you like it. And yeah, it was an interesting book to write. He was a fascinating guy, that's for sure.
Bob Euchre had Dick Allen in the booth a number of seasons back. They must have been fairly close when they were the Phillies together.
Yeah, they were good friends.
Now that
Both
would have
good
been
guys.
here, yeah. Interesting.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Mitch. It was really, really fascinating to talk.
Well,
to you.
thank
was
you.
great.
It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, and I'm glad I'm glad that you were able to come. So it was really nice to talk about the book.
Yeah, well,
thank
and thank you, Mitch. I'm going to thank Mary. She's putting a list of books coming out this year, and she saw this, and I think you had him either one or two on your list of people to reach out to do a meeting
Yeah.
with. So yeah, that was wonderful. So thank you, Mary, as well.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Oh, thank you for letting me do this. Yeah, it was high on my list, so I'm looking forward to it. And anyone who would like to stay and chat, that's fine.
Yeah.
But otherwise, thank you for joining us.
Yeah,
And happy opening day.
Yes, you too. We already got rained out.
we
Yeah,
got rained
I
out.
know, right?
Yeah.
Are you you're a Phillies fan, I assume? Yeah, the Phillies and the Mets are rained out. So
Yeah, so they're playing on Friday.
Yeah.
That's okay. It'll
I'm
come.
going to end the recording. Anybody wants to stick around and chat, please, you're more than welcome to do so. So the recording's going off now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.